Hi, you're listening to The Sociology Show, a podcast about absolutely anything to do with the wonderful world of sociology. Whether you're a teacher, a lecturer, a student, or just taking a passing interest, this podcast will look at a range of issues from social class, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, religion, crime, education, and anything else that sociology has to offer. My name is Matthew Wilkin, and each episode I will speak to someone working in the field of sociology and let them explain all about their own interests, their research, and their experiences. So, put your earphones in, turn the volume up, and let's be sociology geeks together, eh? Hello and welcome to The Sociology Show. The Sociology Show podcast is brought to you in association with Tutor2U Sociology, the exam performance specialist for A-level and GCSE sociology students and teachers. And so you can visit their website, which is tutor2u.net/sociology. And there you can pick up revision guides, revision videos, flashcards, and everything else that you need for your A-level or GCSE sociology studies. And so on to this episode. And my guest for this episode is Dr. Brian McDonough. Brian, thank you for joining me.
Hi, Matthew.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you.
Excellent. And you're down in Solent area, is that right? Southampton area?
That's right. I'm course leader of sociology at Solent University in Southampton.
Thanks, Brian. Do you mind telling us a little bit more about you, your kind of journey into the world of sociology, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I'll take it back to when I was in secondary school. And I was at a comprehensive school in Liverpool called Croxteth Comprehensive or Crocky Comp, as it was more known locally. Actually, Croxteth Comp had a really interesting history. There was an occupation of the school back in the 1980s, and a fabulous academic, Professor Phil Francis Carspechan, did his PhD on the school. And they basically, there was a Thatcher government at the time. They were basically wanting to close the school in the 1980s, and parents wanted to keep it open. And so they occupied it. They occupied it physically for a whole year, but they actually had an occupation for 2 years. And eventually the government backed off and they reopened the school. And I'm telling you a bit about that because actually I never realised, until I started doing sociology, I never realised where I got some of my passions, my quirkiness, my challenge and authority from. And actually, it was ingrained in the school culture right the way through the 80s and the 90s that, you know, you've got this community who fought for their education. And so there was always this kind of anti-establishment, I guess, ethos, not just with parents, but through teachers. And so I was taught by some really amazing community leaders, activists, campaigners. I also have to add that, you know, during the occupation, the way they kept the school open was that they invited volunteers. Well, volunteers came because they stopped paying the teachers' salaries. So volunteers came and taught. And of course, volunteers in the local community didn't have teaching qualifications. They were guitar players, musicians, bricklayers. So you had this amazing curriculum. I'm not saying, you know, I'm not trying to say that it was the most spectacular education in the world, but you had this real kind of community education. Anyway, Phil Francis Carspechan wrote his thesis on that school. He's in Indiana University now, and it was called The Fight for Croxteth Comp, community school and the nature of power. And actually, I refer to Carspechan in my text. And actually, Phil Francis Carspechan I got in touch with many years later, and I'm really proud that he wrote one of the forwards, one of the reviews for my new text. So there's a whole connection that goes back to my time in Liverpool. And that's really where sociology began for me. And we were really fortunate. We had an A-level sociology course. I started with A-level sociology, and then I went on to university. I did my undergrads in London Guildhall University, which no longer exists, unfortunately. But I did my undergrad there. And then, that's really where it all started.
That's amazing. And Liverpool's one of my favourite cities now. It's absolutely booming, wonderful place for a weekend. But what was it like during the 80s, during under Thatcher's government? It's a very different place to what it is now, right?
Unemployment was at a high. There was, it was quite I was a kid at the time, so I imagine it was quite a depressing sort of period, the 1980s under the Thatcher government, when there was a lot of social change happening. I remember, just sort of being at a community school, a comprehensive school, and I didn't know any different at that time. I didn't know that they were, the saying is, you don't know how the other half lived. I didn't know, sort of school dinners. There's been lots in the media at the moment about school dinners. Pretty much we all had school dinners, free school dinners in Croxteth, and we didn't know any different. So, there was no kind of stigma attached to that. There were loads of issues, loads of social issues, loads of social problems in that part of Liverpool, as there were in, and as there still are in parts of the UK. Yeah, it was quite I suppose if I'm talking about social disadvantage, I remember, going into the city centre, going into town with my mum, and you used to get, from the state, either vouchers for your school clothes, or they wouldn't even give you vouchers. They'd actually send you to basically a warehouse in the middle of Liverpool, and they'd have a rack of coats, and you go in this room and you'd pick out. My mum would try and pick out, the best of the naffest coats, the best of the least cool coats, because they were awful, and actually there was a stigma to poverty, and to, if you didn't have the latest fashion, because obviously consumerism, always been around, and kids are always judged on what they wear. And I remember, having to kind of like pick out a jacket and a coat. And actually that memory, I've been writing about universal basic income. In fact, I published a book on universal basic income just last year. And that idea of, handouts, giving people cash instead of giving them, a voucher, I think is really, really important. That you should give people, if people have an income, they will help themselves, rather than, just giving them sort of vouchers, or in this case, giving them a coat. So in terms of sort of my memories of social inequality and some social issues, that's sort of one of my memories. But also I was lucky, because I had a really good family, caring family, safe home. There were lots of kids when I went to school that, and still today, that didn't have those things. So I was very, very lucky in that respect.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. You've already mentioned your new book, which that's what I'd like to talk to you about, and Flying Aeroplanes. Do you want to give us the full title to start with? I always like the full titles with sociology books.
Yeah, sure. It's called Flying Aeroplanes and Other Sociological Tales. It's an introduction to sociology and research methods.
Great. Tell us a little bit about how it got started. What was behind it?
Well, I grew up doing sociology A level in the 1990s. So I was doing my A levels then, and this was the time when all of the famous sociology textbooks were out. So the Harold Ambos, the Giddens, you name it. I'd had all these sort of textbooks given to me at school, and I'd use these doing my A levels, and then started using them to begin with at my degree. Still reading some of these texts. And actually, sort of 20 years later, I got a bit annoyed that many texts of that sort, and when I say that sort, I mean concept-driven textbooks, are still today sort of mainly being used for students, for A-level students, for undergraduate students. And so I wanted to write a textbook that was a bit different, because one of the things you learn from doing sociology is that your methods and your theory and your topics are all interrelated. They're not separate things. And yet when you're studying sociology, you have units or modules on research methods, one's on theory, one's on various content matter. And then you have to kind of like string that all together. But actually, when you come to do a dissertation or a thesis, you know, when you're in your final year of your degree, or if you do an MA, or if you're doing a PhD, you have to do all those things simultaneously. And so Flying Aeroplanes and other sociological tales is really, it's an attempt at bringing together theory, methods, and topic again in a narrative. And it's also really reflexive. So it situates the sociologist in each of the short stories. And so in part, I was really frustrated and annoyed with what was out there. But also, you know, I had sort of quite a niche idea. It's the first textbook of this kind to actually situate the sociologist, to tell a sociological tale whilst doing sociology from the sociologist's perspective. There is another book, I should say, called Sociologist Tales, but that's really sort of an autobiography of lives of sociologists, bringing them to the discipline. This book's about doing the methods and using the methods and discussing the methods at the same time as reflecting on those methods from the standpoint of the sociologist.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And looking at the names of your chapters, Brian, this certainly isn't the dull run-of-the-mill textbook, certainly. I mean, if we take, you know, the book is called Flying Aeroplanes. I know that's a chapter in your book as well. Do you want to tell the listeners, where did that name come from? Where did that idea come from for Flying Aeroplanes? Yeah,
so a really good question. So that chapter in particular was based around my doctoral research, which was an ethnographic study of experts' use of information and communication technology in the workplace. And I set out to interview a number of experts who were using technology, and the technology was replacing those experts. So I researched a school teacher who was using software for managing student behaviour. So there was a software called Conduct, which was managing the conduct of bad behaviour in schools, and rewarding good behaviour too. And I was really interested in speaking with the teacher about how she used the software and how that was different from, I don't know, writing the student's name down on a pad and, you know, with a pad and pen. I was also interested in how systems were used in the banking industry. So I interviewed a banker. I also was interested in how doctors and medical professions used medical software to replace some of the things they'd previously done. So even video conferencing and Skype, how that replaces being bodily present with patients. And so finally, I interviewed the airplane pilot about how autopilot technology replicates or takes over some of his expertise when flying airplanes. And so that's really where the Flying Aeroplanes comes in. It's about looking at how technology replaces what humans do. And it's about looking at how autopilot technologies actually replace what the pilots do when flying airplanes. And one of the most interesting aspects of flying airplanes is when the Dusty, the pilot, turned around to me and said, "This is my airplane. I'll damn well fly it if I want to." And what he was saying by that was, they were all asked to use switch autopilot on from the minute they're up in the air. They're told to switch autopilot on, and one of the reasons for that is that when you're a human pilot, you move your hands ever so gently, and they're absolutely brilliant at using their hands. One of the most skillful parts of flying, and I've actually written some articles in a journal called Qualitative Research called The Hands Have It, which is all about the use of the hands by the aeroplane pilot. But what you also do is that you use up more fuel when your human pilot takes over. So they want you to switch back to the autopilot, because the autopilot just uses a little bit less fuel. But if you times that by all the flights around the world, then obviously you're saving millions in fuel. And that's one of the reasons that they want to use the autopilot system. Well, my pilot said, to hell with that. I'm gonna damn well fly my plane. And he talked about switching off the autopilot system in order to fly his own airplane. But the other important focus of the book is the research method. So I actually went on a simulated aircraft used for training pilots, and I flew what's the equivalent of a Boeing 757. And I also went in a real aircraft, a Cherokee aircraft used for training pilots. So he let me fly the airplane myself at one point, and I was a complete novice at that stage. I'm still pretty much a novice. So that's all about research methods, and when he let go of the yoke, that's the steering wheel on the aircraft. When he let go of it and he said, "Brian, you hold on to it," that was an amazing sort of moment. But the other amazing moment was when he held onto his yoke, because the yokes are connected. It's a bit like a driver and a learner drive a car. Yeah. They're connected. And he said, "Look, you hold on, you feel what I'm feeling." And that's sort of like, a big moment in sociology, and any students, listening, or teachers or tutors who know about qualitative research, feeling what I'm feeling is like a key Weberian moment of understanding.
That's amazing. That's proper ethnographic research, that is, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. That's going to be the end of part 1. In part 2, we'll cover some more of the other chapters in your book.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
Hello and welcome back to part 2 of the Sociology Show. I'm talking to Dr. Brian McDonough about his book, Flying Aeroplanes and Other Sociological Tales. Brian, in part 1, we talked about where the title came from, Flying Aeroplanes. I've got to ask you about one of the chapters, The Sociologist and the Stolen Bicycle. I've got to ask you about that one.
Okay, thank you. That's actually probably one of my favourite chapters of the textbook. It's quite a quirky textbook, quite a quirky chapter, and it's a quirky textbook. Why is it quirky? Well, I use what is regarded by some as accidental autoethnography. In fact, if you see a book called Mundane Methods by Les Back, you'll find that term accidental autoethnography. Autoethnography is usually conducted by ethnographers, so the anthropological method of ethnography, of studying another culture and using your own descriptions, not just the descriptions of others, but using your own descriptions, describing your own experiences, is a really great way of doing sociology. And that's what I did. I used my own experiences for that chapter, The Sociologist and the Stolen Bicycle. But it was accidental autoethnography because I never set out to do sociological research when I started, when this experience took place. It was something that I reflected on afterwards. And basically, I was at Whitechapel Hospital in London. It was a skin complaint that I went to the hospital. It was just a 20-minute sort of routine and follow-up. And I cycled to the hospital. I was about 20 minutes from home then, when I lived in London. And to my dread, I came out and my bike was gone. And I had this enormous lock on my bike, and it was gone. And what did I do? I sort of paced around the street, really angry, looking around who might have taken it, because this had been 20 minutes, and the chances are that someone had seen something. Someone was nearby with my bike. It couldn't have been that far away. And I seen a group of kids. They were teenagers, pretty much, 16, 17 years of age. And I had this kind of like a standoff with a group of teens. It sounds ridiculous, but I was sort of looking at them because I thought they were in the vicinity, and at this point, sort of all my sociology got chucked out the window. All my prejudices about young people, gangs, So I was sort of putting the blame on the stolen bicycle on these young people. And in the chapter, I talk about symbolic interactionism. I talk about the social meanings associated with what the young people wore, how they looked, their demeanour, their gaze, and how we interacted with one another just for those moments. Anyway, a police car whizzed past, and it just it took both of my attention and this group's attention away, and it kind of fizzled out. And I called the police a bit later and said, look, I've had the bike stolen. And they were sort of saying, well, good luck with that. There's so many hundreds of bicycles stolen in London every day or every week. But they did say one thing to me. They said, Brian, look out on social media, look out on Gumtree and eBay. So for the next 2 days, I was looking for my bike. And I have to just add that this was a present from my wife that was specially made, with the colours that I wanted. And I found the bike on Gumtree. and I emailed the guy and said, I'd like to buy this bike. And a day later, I met with this guy, this young lad. It did happen to be a young guy. And I checked it was my bike. I asked him how long he'd had. He said, I've had it for months. And I knew this was a lie because this was definitely my bike. Yeah. And off I went. I cycled off. So I actually stole back my own bicycle. And so that's part of the story of the sociologist and the stolen bicycle. The end bit to that is that I was teaching. I was doing a drop-in A-level session at Hackney College a couple of years later, and I told the story to the A-level students. And one of them put their hands up and they said, Brian, I know about this. He said, this was this kind of on the street. There was this story about this guy who came back and stole his bicycle from this youth gang who were actually stealing bicycles left, right, and centre for some cash. So there was this. So there's my story sort of in my narrative, but there's also the narrative of others, and these narratives are really interesting. And this is something I explore in the Sociologist and the Stolen Bicycle.
That's fantastic, and a really, really good way to sort of incorporate theory and introduce people to theory, certainly.
Absolutely, yeah. So
your story had become folklore in those parts then, Brian?
I think so. Well, I think so. According to a couple of young people I spoke to, it was quite famous. They'd remembered it, certainly.
Thank you. And could we just pick up on one other chapter as well? Sure. I know that you've talked about the lockdown and the impacts of the pandemic. Was this something that you just added? I'm guessing it's something you never planned for in the book.
Absolutely. So I planned 7 or 8 chapters. Actually, I'd only planned 7 chapters. They were planned to be around about 10,000 words per chapter. So it's a 70,000 word textbook. But when I wrote these stories, because they were quite short stories, they were a bit less than that. So they were about 6,000 or 7,000 words. And I thought they were quite nice as short sociological stories. And it's nice for students as well to have a short story to read, than a lengthy chapter. But that meant that my book was a lot shorter than I'd planned. So I had space to add chapters. And so the life in lockdown, an embodied account of the coronavirus pandemic, is one of the chapters that I added. And it was based around my experiences of walking to the supermarket. And I've got two young kids, so babies basically. One's just turned 2 and one's just gone 2 months old. And so I was, like lots of parents, moving around with the buggy. And you're actually trying to dodge people. You're actually trying to negotiate space just walking down the street. So that was a big part of the chapter, how we negotiate social space. But then I turned to the work of Michel Foucault, who of course wrote Discipline and Punish, The Birth of the Prison. And I turned to Foucault because Foucault's really good about talking about the ways in which the state manages our bodies and how we're kept under surveillance, and how bodies are tightly controlled and managed. So I used Foucault as a way of making sense of the COVID-19 experience, if you like.
That's great. Really kind of brings the book contemporary, right up to date, certainly. Brian, so a lot of listeners might be listening now thinking, right, where can I get hold of this book? Where can I read it? Where can I pick it up? So do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's a Routledge text, so you can Google my name, Brian McDonough, Flying Aeroplanes, Routledge, or Brian McDonough, Flying Aeroplanes, Sociology, and it'll usually come up on the first page. So it's a Routledge text, but you go on Google, you'll see it's all over all over Amazon and Waterstones and Foils and all the sort of the bookshop sellers as well. But Routledge is probably the quickest place to pick it up. I suppose it's really useful for first year undergraduates, but also for A-level students who are maybe struggling with research methods, or they want something additional around research methods, or maybe they're just a bit they're just a bit disengaged. They would need a bit of enthusiasm, because some of those concept-driven textbooks can be really dry.
Agreed. Yeah.
And just picking up a book, a quirky chapter like The Sociologist and A Stolen Bike can really, I think, could cheer some students up. Certainly, some of my students that have read it and commented on it have said they've enjoyed reading it. So hopefully, if it engages some students and it helps them with their exams or understanding sociology, then that's great.
Brilliant. Excellent. And where can people find out more about you, Brian? I know you're on Twitter, aren't you?
Yeah, so I'm at Twitter. You can follow me at Brian Mac Soc. So Brian MC SOC, Brian Mac Soc, Brian Mac Sociology on Twitter. I'm at Solent University. So anyone's welcome to drop me a Twitter message or an email at my institution. And I'd definitely love to hear from people.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today, Brian. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's great being part of a really great sociology series.
Thank you, Brian. Take care.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show. The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.